I met Ville over a year ago at the Foil Lucida portfolio review, and it's a 20-minute speed date, right? So at the end of the 20 minutes, I looked at him and I said, I've got this idea. I'm doing an exhibition on the water cycle, and would you be interested in creating something site specific for the museum? Well, that began a journey for both of us. And I am so grateful that Ville stuck it out with me when bureaucracy got in the way, when the days seemed never ending, and when the elements almost drowned out his project and him in Judkins Pond. I'm grateful to the Mass Cultural Council, to the Winchester Cultural District, and to the Winchester Cultural Council for their generous support of this project. A little bit about Ville before I turn this over to him. Ville is a Finnish multidisciplinary artist based in California. He works with photography, video, installation, and land art. His work has been featured in several print and online publications such as American Photo Magazine, GUP Magazine, SFAQ, and Diffusion. Ville's awards include a Lucy Award and IPA Fine Art Photographer of the Year. His first monograph was released by DATS Press in 2022, and he's exhibited internationally with nonprofit and private galleries. And it is my distinct and great pleasure to introduce you all to Ville. Ville, the floor goes to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Krista. And yeah, it's been quite the journey, honestly. Really excited to finally get to talk to you about the work. It's kind of hard to believe that it's actually being exhibited right now at the Griffin. So yeah, super happy to kind of share the journey here. Yeah, like Krista said, I'm originally from Finland, but I'm kind of a California native now. I've been here for 15 years. And my work takes me to the Mojave Desert most of the time. The way I work is I travel out and sleep in my truck. I bring a plethora of tools and building materials, and I build installations. Usually these are installations that kind of have the aim of creating interactions with the powers and features of nature and natural events. But most often the main crux is to create installations that gain from the special mechanics of photography. Installations that are in some way or another situated in photographic space. This is kind of an odd circumstance to find myself in a group show that's centered around climate change, because that's not really an explicit interest in my own practice. But my work does, in a way, presuppose the end of civilizations in a way. My interests lie in ancient and prehistoric and religious art, especially megaliths and their connection to the natural and celestial world. And from that platform, broadly speaking, I make work around the question of how might humanity begin again with the building blocks that originally connected us to nature. So to make it more contemporary, I think in a way, my personal thesis is that we need to find a path to being in the world in a deeper foundation of natural experiences, both personal and collective, so we can curtail the solipsistic project that's put us in this dire climate predicament that we find ourselves in. And to try and do that, I employ that rather loaded concept of the spiritual. And I have a kind of personal definition for it. And I paraphrase the German philosopher Martin Heidegger, who put it as discovering the ancients anew. So when I was approached by Krista, the wonderful director at the Griffin, to build these temporary site-specific installations, the big challenge for me was how to align my practice with the group show's theme of water and its relationship to climate change. Since I don't really make this expository work, and I'm not so interested in the comings and goings of everyday life or the focus on science that seems to move a lot of contemporary art and photography. So how might I, marry my arcane interests with the pressing concerns of today? So what I decided to do is that perhaps I could create these monuments on a personal scale. I often imagine what's lost to history. What are the wooden Stonehenges, if you will, that kind of decompose over a single lifetime? But actually, the hardest challenge was that this was my first time building site-specific installations, and they had to last over 3 months in a climate that I normally never worked in. They had to be built for a museum in the middle of an ongoing renovation, in unrelenting 90-degree heat and humidity, several week thunderstorms, and this power wash rain that's really conspired to destroy every single thing that I was making. And the extreme weather plagued me throughout the entire process. So even the work that I was making as a kind of background, the field work that I was making, I was always caught in some satanic heat wave or a freak desert lightning storm, or the flooding that ensued from the enormous amount of water that was falling on normally arid landscapes. And so if this wasn't climate change, then I don't know what is. And so during one of the wettest years on record, I made something titled the Arid Harbingers. This body of work is composed of 2 site-specific installations, some photographic works with sculptural elements. And broadly speaking, the work is an attempt to make a more metaphorical and natural approach to convey the effects of climate change and the fragility and impermanence of water. To me, climate change at its core is about the death of human beings. On a planetary scale, it's totally meaningless. All landscapes have the same unavoidable terminus. They all become desert. So salting the earth is a 24 by 4 foot site-specific installation on the north shore of Judkins Pond, which is, as you can see, adjacent to the museum. The museum is at the lower left corner there. It's primarily made out of wood, Mojave Desert sand that I collected, some local soil from the museum's grounds, and limestone mortar. It's a work designed to simulate the effects of saltwater intrusion on the soil that it's situated in. And it's kind of prescient because Louisiana is suffering from pretty bad saltwater intrusion right now, and so it's a topic that's in the news. But I think I want to still offer you a brief definition of what saltwater intrusion really is, and it's a process of where saline water moves into freshwater aquifers. So sea level rise and extreme weather events are really common causes for saltwater intrusion. And then that process of intrusion, it'll kill crops and plant life, and then it'll disrupt the entire ecosystem. So when I started researching the idea, I found this kind of visual language from the effects of saline intrusion on the eastern seaboard. Especially because that's where the oldest farms in North America are situated. And there's something kind of sad and poetic about how they're some of the worst affected. And I was literally also mimicking those rectangular plots of farmland in the form of the installation. Now, being as I make most of my work out on dry lakes, it just made immediate sense for me to try to bring the actual desert to the museum. It's because I've had experiences where I observed all the peculiar ways that salt affected my own land-based work. When I mixed water with my sculptural work, it often became kind of animated through efflorescence and the like. So it creates these white surfaces that surprise you when the actual clay starts to dry and things like that. So I wanted to find a way to gradually salt the earth on the edge of the pond to create a direct relationship to the location. But salt is really precarious, and I pretty soon realized that there was no real way to assure the Conservation Council for the city of Winchester that I could really control where the hell the water and the salt would flow if it were to rain. So I wanted to avoid, well, actually, rather, I wanted to simulate saltwater intrusion. I didn't want to create saltwater intrusion. So to satisfy everybody's concerns, I realized that I had to make the installation more or less inert, even if it were to rain. So I opted to use limestone as the primary material for the installation. Essentially, the installation was to be made of these limestone mortar tiles. And it's a great material because it's completely biodegradable, unlike and it captures carbon as it cures, so it's completely net zero, as you know, as opposed to its ugly cousin concrete. And it's also an ancient building material. Rome is built on limestone, so it felt like a really good natural material to work with. Unfortunately, it's also really difficult. There's a reason why limestone masons are very expensive professionals. It requires these insanely careful conditions for it to cure. You need to prepare substrates, or in my case, the wood that the limestone was laid on, to be like really wet all the time, so it cures and carbonates properly. And it has all these other fickle specific mixtures as to what kind of sand to use. And it's just a kind of a nightmare. I don't know if I would to decide to use it again, but it's definitely something that's hard to master. And so finally, after we were able to attain a permit in July, I began the 10 very strenuous days of building the actual installation. Because the weather kept turning all the time, I had to do the outdoor work first, which kind of messed the schedule a little bit. But I started with, and you can kind of see in the video, but the first stage was to prepare and grade the site because it was kind of on a slope. And what I did was I flattened it out for the container that was going to sit in it. And then I collected a lot of the soil for future use in the installation. And then when the crazy rains came in, I started to work in the museum, cutting and assembling the large container and the mortar tiles that would eventually sit inside of it. And since the museum was being renovated, I could actually work in the same room where the work was eventually going to hang. So I could ruin the floors and do whatever the hell I wanted, which was great. And also it was air conditioned, which was a definite plus. So you can kind of see in the video me cutting the grooves into the tiles with circle saws for the mortar to anchor onto, and making these risers. So it was a little bit above the bottom. And the bottom had this paint, so it would kind of blend with the container that was wholly black. The serious problem I had was that I was really making the limestone mortar in the worst possible conditions. It was much too hot, it was raining too hard, and there wasn't a lot of time to get the mortar to cure properly. So I had to get everything assembled in a really short period of time. And because of that, I worked day and night most of the days were from around 8 a.m. to 2 or 3 a.m. In some cases, the days didn't really end at all because I would work through the night to race to get the mortar to start curing. But in the end, I did get it done, and maybe in some ways, the labor itself was an integral part of the finished work. It's sort of enormous scale, certainly for this one man to pull off alone. So I came out with some swollen knees and terrible back pains, and even my fingers hurt for a few days. But it did get done, and it did in that way also fit that original premise of being a monument on a personal scale. The Mojave Portals is also a site-specific installation, and it's adjacent to the museum building itself. So it has a connection from inside the museum all the way out into the Judkins Pond. And I use the word portal because even though the installation at face value is a collection of sections of sand and rocks transported from a dry lake bed in the Mojave and then integrated into the museum's landscape, they're also representations of the future of the pond and the terminus of the entire landscape, and really all landscapes everywhere. So they function on an abstract temporal dimension by giving you a glimpse into the future of the landscape, but also on this spatial dimension by explicitly representing a location that's really far away. In this case, the Coyote dry lake bed in the Mojave Desert. And I also try to reinforce that through the use of photography, showing the exact location of where the rocks came from and where the soil came from. And now them being situated in the museum and its grounds, creating that sort of visual connection. In addition, there's in the photographs there, not only of the rocks that are in the installation, but there's also the remnants of the sections taken a month after I had actually removed the soil, because I had to go back and get more sand because one never has enough sand at home. The two metallic prints that are part of the installation are in these boxed frames, and they place even more emphasis on this idea of a portal, a kind of subversion of place and time. First of all, the surface is like a sheer metal, so it functions like a blurry mirror. And the photograph in the metal print is of the actual rock that's in front of it, and it's taken on the dry lake bed. So essentially, there's three versions of the rock. So there's the physical rock in front of it. There's a print on that sheer metal, and then there's a reflection of the physical rock on the print surface. But if you look really closely, you can see that the rock is reversed or mirrored in the actual print. So the reflection is actually, the reflection in the print is actually identical to the print itself. And, that's the power of photography. That's normally not even possible. In addition, the box frame is built in such a way that the metal print is like at an angle. So the surface is always reflecting desert sand or the rock that's placed in front of it. And that works to ensure that if you change your eye level, you walk around the work, you should always just see the desert sand and always just see the rock. So it removes the location of the museum from the installation. And I think more importantly, it removes yourself from it. You can't really see yourself in the reflection. You can't even see your own legs unless you try really hard. The other function of the box frames is to connect the inside to the outside. Again, using the same sand and the same rock from the same section of the desert, and it's placed into the museum landscape. And it all becomes connected by twine and sand. And then obviously the most exciting part is that the tiles of sand and rock extend onto the water surface. That they're sitting on these rafts that I fashioned from sand mortar, wood, and these funky foam pool noodles. You can see on the picture there. The wood frame itself is burned and oiled with tung oil to seal it from and prevent it from rotting, and also just again to try to use natural and non-toxic substances so as to mitigate any sort of leaching in the lake. The rafts are also anchored in place with like cinder blocks, so they have a little bit of leeway on the wires. The original plan I had was to just walk the rafts into place. However, that plan was summarily abandoned after I almost drowned by getting my legs literally stuck in the bottom of the pond, and it was just sucking me in. And like an idiot, I wouldn't let go of the cinder block or the piece of the raft, because I thought, well, you know, if I'm going to go down, I'm going to go down with it. But I did finally get out, and I didn't even need to like cry for help or anything. So it wasn't too humiliating, fortunately. But that kind of left the problem of how was I going to get him out there? And Krista was able to get me a clutch kayak loan, courtesy of Silke, who's a true friend of the museum, as I understand it, and now a true friend of mine. So finally, I was able to get the rafts into place, and you know, even like a couple hours to spare to catch my flight. So it all worked out in the end. Arid. Arid is a Finnish word for harbinger or messenger. And this is a quadriptych of photographs where this makeshift tripod suspends an elongated stone, which acts as a kind of metaphorical measurer of water levels. And I traveled with this 50-pound granite rock, and I installed it onto lakes at different stages of life. The idea I wanted to experiment with was how certain objects might gain a kind of numinous presence. You know, if this rock touches all these bodies of water and it can trace the death of lakes, then does it gain some kind of power in our imagination? Does it, you know, gain a kind of potential to become animated? I found a lot of inspiration for the sculpture itself from the age-old practice of percussion well drilling. So you essentially have a pulley and you have a bunch of guys pulling and creating this percussion. I think that's an auger of sorts that gets pounded into the ground. And this is a practice that's been around for who knows how long, thousands of years, and still an effective way to bore a well if you don't have a machine to do it. And so it only seemed like the appropriate design to appropriate. The 4 lakes that I chose for the series are all intertwined with the complexities of climate change, spiritual history, and the complicated politics of water in California. Clear Lake was the first lake that I traveled to, and the deepest. It's the oldest lake in North America, where the Pomo peoples and their ancestors have had a presence for over 11,000 years. And it used to be the spiritual center for the Pomo secret societies from all over California. So all the chiefs of all the different Pomo tribes would convene there to gain secret information. And Mono Lake was the second place. And it's pretty famous for its beleaguered and disastrous water management problems due to policies from LA diverting water ever since the 10s to 20s. And it nearly dried out, or pretty much almost completely dried out, until a lot of activism and finally reaching a protected status in 1994, I think. and since regained a lot of its water level, but it's still very precarious due to all the mega droughts, etc. The third lake is Owens Lake, also another notorious failure of Los Angeles water management policies. It is more or less totally dry, and it creates these deadly dust storms for the locals, and has created a lot of issues with cancer and air quality all the way out to LA. And there are all these desperate measures to try to fill it. But it definitely is still an ongoing, also legal battle with the LA Department of Water to try to make sure that they mitigate it and try to protect it. But when I was there this year, because of the extreme rains, it was actually the first time in over 100 years that parts of the lake were actually flooded. So that was kind of a trip to go there, since I'd been there before, to see so much water in it. Anyway, and then the fourth lake is the Coyote Lake, where I make most of my work, and I feel, I guess, most familiar with. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of information about the history of it in any sort of cultural or, there's not a lot of cultural information about it. But from a geological standpoint, it's been dry for thousands of years, maybe about 10,000 years. Its name is likely derived from the two overlapping tribes that were active in that area, for both of whom the coyote is a really important god, like, I guess, creator of the world, usually in a lot of their myths. So maybe it's named after that. It's not really 100%. I'm not 100% sure, but that seems like a possibility. I guess the overarching thing that I realized about, as I was even, preparing for this presentation and have been thinking about it, is that the wetter it gets, the more history we know. The drier it's getting, the more political problems, and then the driest we don't know anything about. So it kind of is an interesting arc of water history. Here's a map to give you an idea of how far apart all these lakes are. The entire trip that I had to go around in about 5 days was 1,200 miles, and it's about 20 hours of driving through 3 different types of climates. All the while, I was maneuvering this 8-foot tripod made out of wood that alternated from being too heavy on land and too buoyant in the water. I was trying to escape these crazy desert thunderstorms. And, I've been working in the desert for 10 or so years. I'd never seen anything like this before. And you don't really want to be stuck there when it starts raining, like the Burning Man people this year found out. And then just dealing with this 50-pound rock. And I have a kind of a notoriously bad back, so it wasn't fun. And then fighting heat stroke, not well sometimes. Trying to get the tripod to stay on top of the truck, because it had this tendency of coming off because it would break, and then it would, I would see it in my side view mirror on the freeway, and somehow I didn't, clothesline any cars or motorcycles. And, finally, to cap everything off, the last day when I was shooting, things got kind of biblical, because I had a swarm of actual, honest to God, locusts all around all around my location. So yeah, it definitely got biblical. Anyway, I want to conclude the presentation with this overarching timeline of all the stages that went into making the work a reality, all the way beginning from September 22, when I came out to do some of the site work, and had some pretty naive ideas about salt and digging in the mud that turned out to be toxic and not very good. And I think overall, when I'm looking at it through looking at the whole process, looking at the whole kind of as a roadmap, it really occurs to me that it really speaks to the commitment and support Krista had for me, and the opportunity she created to have this space and creative control and time during the residency. And it's really been probably the most special time in my entire career, if I'm being honest. Of course, I had no clue what it would be like when we first had that conversation in Portland, and she suggested I could make some site-specific installations. You know, I was pretty foolish, and I made a lot of foolish mistakes, and I had some small successes, and you know, I had to solve a lot of new technical engineering problems. I had a lot of long drives, long nights, overly ambitious structures I was trying to build. You know, I was kayaking a pond with cinder blocks on my lap. And so when I arrived in September, I figured, okay, you know, it was like the final little install, a few days. I figured the worst was behind me. Now it's time to like enjoy it all, do some finishing touches. But, you know, there's always some last trial in the end. And so in the intervening 2 months, I had realized that the installation was just wiped out because of the unusually freakish hard rainfall. And I was feeling really shattered, honestly, because I had put all this work into it. And I was really, you know, I had my mindset on what it was supposed to look like and feel like. And, you know, after the sort of initial shock wore out, Morgan, my wife, as she always does, asked me if, you know, there's something I could do about it other than feel sorry for myself. You know, my father, after all, was visiting from Finland, and to see the damn thing. So, you know, 2 days away from opening, I walked over to the hardware store. I got myself supplied. I started making new mortar out of some of the leftover desert sand and lime that was left over from last time. And I, you know, found the piles of soil that I left from my previous diggings around. And you know, I went about fixing the thing. But you know, it was pretty terrifying, to be honest. I didn't know how I was going to end up, and you know, people were going to show up, and I had to try to be respectable. And now I felt like, honestly, it was the better for it in the end, because finally I felt like maybe the local soil got a chance to live in the installation a bit more. It felt kind of more organic and more ancient in some ways. So it lent this kind of gravitas to the piece that I don't think I had been able to create. And so just to close the presentation here, I just want to say that, you know, nature tends to make you humble. You know, it will humiliate you, but it will also elevate you if you learn to accept and you adapt. And so thank you for your time and your gracious attention. So thank you.